Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Flowery Folk podcast. I am going to chat about Mother's Day today. This episode is planned to go out in enough time, I hope, for you to sort of take on board some of these ideas that I have about Mother's Day and maybe implement them in your shop if you are struggling with peak periods and how to manage them. Because unless you have been in floristry for quite some time, and maybe sometimes if you have been doing it for a while, some of us can really struggle with the major influx of orders and demand for our product over those peak periods, particularly Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, sometimes over the Christmas, Easter period, but it's particularly Mother's Day and Valentine's Day here in Australia. And I've been in the industry for quite a while now. I've managed a lot of Mother's Days and Valentine's Days. And over the years, I found I got much better at planning my Mother's Day and also then executing what I would say a successful Mother's Day. And I wanted to run through with you today those sort of major keystone elements that I would have, or I used to use to ensure that Mother's Day went really well. It is a hugely popular time for florists. Traditionally here in Australia, it is when the only time people will sometimes send flowers, which can be a little bit sad, but it is nice to know that they're acknowledging their mums and they're going to send her something lovely. But it does create a lot of demand on what we do, and it means that we need to really plan quite intricately how we're going to go about these days. So if you haven't gathered by now, I am all about planning. And over previous podcasts, I mention it quite a lot. You really need to sit down and plan, I believe. Anyway, I don't know how you can go through, particularly these peak periods, without sort of a plan to hold on to. I know, just me personally, I think I'd go crazy through stress. And I know some people just go through it. That's great for them, but I could not do it. So if you're struggling, just like I used to, there are some key things that you can do to alleviate that stress and make sure you have a successful Mother's Day. So what is a successful Mother's Day? Well, peak period, really. It's about obviously making the most of the opportunity to sell as much product as we can. We are in the business of making money, but it's also very much about managing how you go about that, because there's no point in you selling a shitload of orders if you don't have the ability to do all of those orders or to do those orders well to the standard that you do your day-to-day stuff. So that is what a successful peak period is. It's getting as many of the orders as you think you can take and successfully executing them, making sure that your customers have a beautiful experience, and at the end of the day, making sure that you have benefited from all of that extra work and actually made money. So these tips that I'm going to go through hopefully will help you do all of that. It's difficult in some ways to sort of plan these peak periods. I definitely will acknowledge that, because we are at the whim of our customers at the end of the day. Maybe they will decide to take mum out to lunch or brunch instead of sending her flowers this year. But you never really know that. Also, the economic climate can affect things as well. Maybe they can't afford to send mum a beautiful bouquet of flowers, and this year they might just do a lovely box of chocolates or something simple. You just don't know how that's going to pan out. However, you can still come up with a very strong plan that will help you, and you can take into the consideration economic factors and things like that as well. So let's get into it, have a look, and yeah, hopefully it helps. So the first thing I wanted to mention that's on my list of planning for Mother's Day is producing a product menu and making it quite small compared to your normal day-to-day offerings. So what I mean by that is cut it back to, I don't know, 5 to 8 items max. And it doesn't have to be as elaborate as your day-to-day because you simply don't have the time to be making all of those different pieces. You want to produce the most amount of product in the simplest way possible, and that's by series production, making the same thing over and over and over again. So have a predetermined product menu of what it is you're going to be offering. You could call it a special Mother's Day range, whatever, but limit what you're offering your customers. Because if you give them a lot of choice, they're going to pick lots of different things and it's just way too hard. The idea of having a limited product menu as well helps you then plan what flowers and what foliage you're going to need to order. Because a big problem with peak periods is over ordering. I've definitely done that, where you've ordered too much product, you can't sell it, and it obviously goes to waste. So if you've got a very set product menu, it's going to help you, as best you can, guesstimate how much of each particular flower or foliage you're going to need. So the first thing I would say, sit down, work out a very specific menu that you're going to be offering your clients. Think about your different price points. You obviously need an entry price. You also need something at quite a high price as well. That's the one that they're all going to goo and gar about. They may not be able to afford it. Then they'll pick something in the middle. So I would say find 5 to 8 products, various price points, possibly a few slightly different styles and colors, whatever, however you want to do that. But be very specific that this is your Mother's Day offerings and that's it. That's all you can order over this period. You then take that, you would work out what product you're putting in each. So sit down, how many of this, how many of that, how many of something else go into it. And then from there, you'll take that and you'll roll it over and say, well, okay, I want to make 20 of this particular pink bouquet. So that means I'm going to need X amount of bunches of that rose. I'm going to need X amount of bunches of that lily, tulip, whatever it is. That is how you work out your product order that would go to your wholesaler. It's so much safer than just guessing and going, oh, look, that looks pretty. I'll just have 20 bunches of that and I'll have 20 bunches of this. If you have a predetermined list of products that you know are going to be used in a certain design, it's going to be so much easier to make sure you use everything and you're not going to have that waste. If you're not sure of where to start with your numbers of items that you're going to create, for instance, in your product menu, you're going to have 8 items and you're not sure how many you're going to make, look at last year. If you're lucky enough to have already been in business, look at last year's turnover. What was that figure? You want to try and aim for something similar or above. This is where you take into consideration, well, what is the economic climate like? Have sales been up or down over the last 6 months? You can adjust it as best you can, taking into those factors. But use that data from last year to set your guide for this coming year. So again, that product menu, you know then if you're going to do 20 of product A, 20 of product B, maybe you're going to do 50 of product C, whatever that adds up to is going to be your sales target for the period of Mother's Day. So then you've got something to be aiming for, and it's going to be obviously based on what you did last year. It's not just a made up number. Now, if you have just started, this is where it can be a little bit more tricky. You may have to obviously consider things like, what have you been doing at the moment? Like, how many orders are you doing on the daily? What's your customer base like? How many people you've got to come and help you? What advertising you're doing for Mother's Day? Just consider all of those things, and you are in some way going to have to make your best guess. But think about what you really can do in that time. And as I said, go back and think about who's going to be buying it. You can't just make up and say, oh, look, I expect to turn over $20,000 in product for Mother's Day. If you're not planning any advertising, if you currently don't have any customers, that may be possibly too high. You might need to think about something else. So you need to, in that instance, come up with your best estimate of what your sales target is going to be. We'll talk more about sales targets in a while as well. But the next thing I would say in my recommendation for a successful Mother's Day is streamline your systems. So this is something you need to plan for. It needs to happen before Mother's Day. Think about how you can make things as efficient as possible. One big thing is try and get as many customers to order online rather than phoning you or coming into the shop. Obviously, that's nice too. But if you're thinking of time, this is the quickest way for you to receive an order because they're doing all the work. Okay. So you might want to promote online ordering through your social media, through your newsletter mail outs. Even think about having a voicemail on your phone for when you are busy and you're on the phone. That guides people to the website so that they can order there. It also helps them not forget, like, oh my gosh, the phone is busy at this florist. I'll start ringing around. You've just given them where to go. So it just makes it a little bit easier for that. And as I said, it saves so much time. Back in the day when I had my shop, online ordering wasn't as big. I'd probably say, I don't know, we would have maybe 10 in every 100 orders would have been done online. Nowadays, obviously, it is so much different. A lot of people are ordering that way. It's easy for them and it is very good for us as florists because we get that order without much time at all. So think about that. Try and promote online ordering for your customers. It will make it so much easier. Another thing you need to think about with streamlining your systems is how do you keep track of the product you've sold and the orders that are coming in. That is something that always gets a little bit stressful for florists, particularly in the pointy end, a day from Mother's Day when you've got all of these orders coming in and you only have limited stock, so you just need to manage that. So a lot of the times that is a florist running around, ticking off, so far we've sold so much of this, so much we've sold, so much of that. It's a time-consuming thing. Thinking about how you can manage the stock control automatically. So through your point of sale system, so if you're using something like Squarespace or Square, they can keep track of the product that you're selling and it's there. It's easy to do. Also through your website, that will tell you how many of each item you've sold and it just makes it easier for you to keep track. You're not running around the night before everything's to be delivered trying to figure out if you've got a freaking enough stuff to do what needs to be done. So keep an eye on that and think about it in advance. How can I set up a system to keep track of my ordering? I would think a lot of people are moving over to a digital platform now for their POS, but if not, maybe it's a bit soon to, you might not do it this Mother's Day, but maybe think about something like that for next peak period. You've got like a whole 12 months nearly to work on that. It would definitely save you a lot of time, just make things a lot easier. The next thing that people don't really think about when they're planning for their peak periods is starting to prep as early as possible. Things like stuffing your envelopes with flower food and care cards, that can be done months in advance. Maybe having your vases decorated, if that's what you do, or stickers on vases. Any job that you can do well in advance, get it done. Don't wait for when you're in the throes of Mother's Day to start having to stuff things in envelopes or put a ribbon around a bloody box or whatever it is. Think of things that you can do in advance so it's all there ready for you to go. Another thing that you need to possibly think about, and it was something that I used to do a lot, is getting some of your product quite early. I'm talking about foliage, obviously, not pretty delicate flowers, but your foliage is something that can last in your fridge for weeks. Now, don't get it there and let it sit there for weeks. Not ideal, but think about getting it possibly the week before. I used to do that. Here in Queensland, we have May Day weekend, which is always the weekend before Mother's Day. So that would actually mean a delay in getting our product early the week of Mother's Day because of that public holiday on the Monday. So it would push out our delivery dates. So what I used to do is get my foliage late on the Friday before, and that way I had all long weekend to prep up foliage. And what I mean about prepping up foliage is stripping it up for bouquets and having bundles ready to go for your bouquets. Having your vessels pre-greened with foliage. So your ceramic containers with chicken wire. Have your foliage sitting in that. Yes, you need to make sure there's a heap of water. Yes, it is in some ways double handling. I get that. But if you sit down and think about the preparation of your foliage and how long that can take, if that is pre-done and all you have to do as the designer is walk into the cold room, grab that vessel pre-done with foliage and pop in your flowers, it can reduce so much time. I would say nearly half the time to actually make the item. So think about that. And let's not kid ourselves. Peak periods, stock has been cut way earlier than any other time of the year. So getting your foliage a week early, if it is the right type of foliage and you care for it correctly, it is not going to reduce the lifespan of that product. So think about that. I know some people get a little bit shocked when I would say that. No, I'd get it in the week before and do it. But if you are smart with what you're ordering and you are ordering product that is going to hold up, you're looking after it, don't neglect it, there's no reason that it is still going to outlast the flowers a week after that again. So think about doing that. What can you prep up beforehand? And as I said, bunches for your bouquets is a nice, easy thing to do early. So start early with your foliage preparation. It will save heaps and heaps of time. Another thing that I wanted you to think about is your staffing. Now, for a lot of us in a florist shop, our staffing is going to be one of our biggest expenses, especially on a peak period like Mother's Day. This is when you need all hands on deck. They all need to do longer hours than normal. So staffing is a huge, huge expense on your business. And you need to manage the hours that your staff are doing. So a couple of things that I want to point out with staffing, because you can look at it on two different ways depending where you are when you're in your shop or what sort of business that you have. It's the first thing is, who do you have? So maybe if you're in a smaller shop or you're in a area where you don't have access to a lot of florists that you can just bring in, who do you have working for you? What is the number of staff you have at hand? And what are their skill sets? How many florists do you have? How many people that can you get to come in and do the phones, take orders, do deliveries, all of that stuff? So the first thing you need to ask is, how many do you have? Or if you're maybe in a spot or a location where you have access to extra staff, like maybe in a capital city where there might be more freelancers, how many staff do you need? So you might, as I said, you may have to look at that in two different ways depending on how you are. If you were lucky enough to be in a situation as like, how many staff do I need? You're going to be figuring that out by looking back over that plan you did for a start, which was your product menu, and how many total of each product you're going to be make. Because you'll be able to sort of figure out from that, okay, this one bouquet is going to take a florist 20 minutes to make, for instance. How many of those bouquets do I need to make? Okay, that's going to be 6 hours work for one person. So you can work that out and get a good idea of how many staff that you need, and you can go out and try and secure those staff sooner rather than later, because it doesn't matter where you are. The good staff, the good florists that are freelancing and sort of going around to different places, they're going to be snaveled up a lot quicker than everyone else. So if you've started this plan early, you can go reach out to those freelancers and say, look, I can give you X amount of hours for the week of Mother's Day. Is that going to work for you? So that's how you will tackle, how many do I need? If you're in a situation where you don't have access to a lot of staff, which is definitely how I used to be in my shop, because it wasn't in an area where I had access to a lot of skilled florists. So unless I employed them, they just weren't there. So in that case, it was like, well, how many staff do I have? And From that, I would then have to figure out how much work can we physically do, because I couldn't just take on more and more and more orders because we just didn't have the capacity to take those orders on. Or it would mean that we'd be there through until midnight, which is another problem in itself. So when you are planning your staffing, you need to also, once you've worked out who you have and what orders you can do or how many you need to sit down and actually set some strict start and finish times, because in the throes of Mother's Day, we all get busy, we're tired, we're stressed, and staff can have a tendency to just want to stay longer. I had this all the time with my staff. They were like, "Oh, no, we'll just stay. We'll just do this. We'll do that." And there were a few times where we would just blow out our expenses on hours, because once they get to a certain point, they're on overtime, they're on double time. When they've accumulated so many hours per week, they're on overtime, they can be on double time. So really keep an eye on what you're spending on staff. And I used to find it really helpful to have some really strict start and finish times. So thinking about how many I need per day to do the planned amount of orders, when I could get some to start. So I'd have some earlier and then I could have some finishing later. So you'd sort of work those hours so that we were keeping track of what those total hours were going to be. That's because we were in a situation that we didn't have access to a lot of extra stuff. So who we had was it, and we had to work in around that. So if you're in the other category where you have access to extra freelancers, you still need to keep track of it because it can easily blow out. Have that plan, who's starting when are they going to finish, so that you know before how many staff you have for each time frame throughout the day. And it will just keep track of your costs, because that is the easiest way for expenses to blow out. Trust me, I have been there. My first ever peak period, not knowing what I was doing at all. Everyone that I had coming to work for me was fantastic. They were there to do the hours, and they did. We did. We worked until like 2 a.m. And I know a lot of florists work more than that. But we worked for like 2 or 3 a.m. and then they were back again the next day. And that is ridiculous. And when you sit down to work out that sort of how much that is going to cost you in overtime, there was no point. Yes, we were doing more orders, but it was costing me more to do those orders. So we should have really just capped the orders and finished at 12, because in the end, as I said, you didn't make any money. Another thing, when I talked about knowing how many staff you have access to, another time in my shop, I had a bit of a restructure, and some of the staff that I had moved on, and I was in the process of employing new staff who weren't ready really for a Mother's Day period. So we did a Mother's Day with just myself, a senior florist, and my wonderful mum. And in that instance, I just went through my plan. I knew how many people I had, how many man hours I had, and I set us a goal of what we could create within reasonable time over that period. So yes, my sales for that Mother's Day were down probably about, I'd say like 20%, 25%. But overall, my costs were down as well, and I made the same amount of money. So it's not all that bad. If you don't have a lot of staff, don't stress out. Set your target to do what you and those limited amount of staff have, and it will still sort of work out all right at the end. On staff, happy staff are motivated staff. We need to look after our staff. They have a very specific skill set. We can't just, well, not usually, can't just pull anyone off the street to do what we need done, especially over Mother's Day and Valentine's Day. That's when you really need your staff to be behind you. So get them involved. Before peak periods come around, sit down with them, have a team meeting, let them know what your sales targets are. If they have an idea of what they're working for, they're going to have a much greater stake in getting it to happen. And they're going to want to help you reach those goals. So let them know what you're aiming for. Let them know beforehand what the roster's looking like, how many hours each person's getting, just so they know. Give them as much information as possible. Also, with your staff, a fun thing that I like to do is sort of gamify it a little bit. Give them like fun prizes for different achievements throughout peak period. I know we used to have gift vouchers or fun prizes or silly little things for different things, like whoever got maybe the highest individual sale, or maybe who did the most product upsells, just anything sort of crazy that will keep it fun for them as well. Like, everyone has a bit of fun when it's like, "Oh, I've just sold a $200 order," and then the next person is like, "Oh, well, I just sold a $220 order." So it just makes it a little bit more fun. Give them a prize for their efforts because they deserve that. And also think about that at the end of the whole thing. When Mother's Day is done and dusted, maybe go out and celebrate. It doesn't have to be a big expense. It could just be maybe a lovely lunch, or it's just something that you do with your team to say thank you for their hard work, because they do work hard. So try and get your team as involved as possible and make it fun for them. Oh, that's what I was going to say as well. Feed your team. Keep it simple. You don't want to have to be stressing about people coming and going all day. Get someone in to cater for lunches and snacks. Think about good quality, high energy sort of food, not just caffeine and chocolate. Nice, healthy snacks to keep the team full of energy and like ready to just keep going and going and going. I was so lucky. I used to have my grandmother would cater for us. She would make amazing sandwiches and salad rolls. And yes, she would make some yummy cakes and slices as well. Or even if you have to outsource your catering, but just think about keeping that team as nourished and as sort of full of energy as you possibly can. Because again, a happy team makes everything so much better. Another thing on staffing to think about is get each person to complete a very specific job. What I mean by that is one staff member is on bouquet duty. One staff member might be making the large arrangements. Another staff member will be doing the small arrangements. Whatever you've got going on in your shop, give individual people a very specific job. That will mean they're not going from this to this to this to this. They're just doing one thing. And it sort of goes on to that podcast we did a while ago about series production. If you're creating things in multiples, you do it so much more efficiently. And obviously, efficiency is what we're striving for over these peak periods. Another thing with your team are your delivery drivers. So a little tip I've sort of found, and I just think it works really well, is if you can, try and have a few extra delivery drivers to get as much of your product out early, rather than a limited number and then the product is sitting in the shop for longer. I hope that makes sense. So you want to have, say, I don't know, depending on the size of your shop, maybe you'll want 5 delivery drivers to only work, 9 until 12 to get all of that product out as early as they can, rather than 2 delivery drivers that have to work through until 5 or 6 o'clock at night. It just gets the product out early to your customer. It's not sitting around the shop any longer than it needs to be. It's in the hands of those people who should have it, and it's not sitting around. If you have access to extra drivers, I would recommend that you do that. Also think about your staff, possibly that maybe you've got people in your shop that aren't very strong with floral design. What things can you have them doing? They're the people that will be doing the sales on the phone. They're the people that we might be running around checking that the web orders are all in correctly. They're going to be the people doing all of that stuff in the background. So we don't need all florists. There's a lot of jobs over those periods that a florist doesn't have to do. They can just be someone who can take instruction and just get things done. So think about what jobs other people in your organization can do to take the weight off the florist, because you do not want your florist to be taking customer orders when they should be making flowers, because it delays the whole process, and then before you know it, your hours are completely blown out of the water and you've spent a heap of money. Something that I would also encourage you to think about is the capacity for the work that you're taking on. There gets a point, and I sort of touched on this when we're talking about hours, but there becomes a point within the day or your Mother's Day period where you may be at the point of, I've sold nearly all my product, and do you need to order more or do you just call it quits? So if you're at that point, you need to consider a couple of things. Depending on the time, if you've reached capacity and it's, I don't know, it's Thursday, you've got time maybe to get more product. So that is definitely a possibility. If you reach capacity at Friday afternoon, maybe Saturday morning, do you have time to get more product is another thing. Depending on where you are, obviously some people do have time to get other products, but if you're in a regional area, that's probably not going to happen. So when are you at capacity? Think about that. If you are at the other end and you're at capacity, do you want to take on more work? Your team is tired, you're tired. If you are at capacity, you have hit your sales target. Are you happy with that? And there's nothing wrong with saying, oh my God, I've hit my sales target. It is Friday afternoon. Shit, yeah, I'm awesome. We're going to just rock it on and finish the weekend. So there's nothing wrong with that. If you've got that clear sales target, you know that you've reached the turnover that you wanted. So just think about that. Not all the time is taking more money, more orders the way to go, because obviously there's more stress on yourself, there's more stress on your staff. That also brings in the stress of, can you source more flowers to then obviously redo and sell on to your clients. So at some point, you need to make that call, hopefully, if you're at the point of reaching capacity. Another thing that I want to finish off with is recording it. Write it all down. Once the dust is settled, you have got your way through yet another Mother's Day, write notes. What worked well? What was absolute shit that, you'd never want to do again? What products sold really well? What products didn't sell very well? How was staffing? Did staff have to stay a little longer than you had planned? Were staff leaving a little bit earlier than you had planned? Did you reach your sales targets? If not, what was the difference? Write everything down. Reason is that is your plan that you take for next time. It gives you all the foundations of how the last one went. And trust me, don't sit there and go, oh, I'll remember, because you won't. So much happens in 12 months, you will not remember the intricate detail of how the last one went. So please write everything down. I used to sit down and do it on the Sunday afternoon in just exhaustion, but leave it a day or two if you like, but write absolutely everything down. Whether you do it on your computer, I used to just write it in my diary, because you have your diary all the time. Just everything and anything I could think about. I would also have copies of what my product menu was, what my wholesale order was, any discrepancies from what I ordered, what turned up, like absolutely everything. Write it down and use that as your blueprint when you step into the next Mother's Day, because it's everything that you have done. And that's when, like I started at the podcast, you can look at that and adjust. How have things been this year? Have you noticed an increase in sales over the last 12 months? Do I need to order more than I ordered last year? Or has the economy slowed a little bit, and do I need to maybe order a little bit less than last year because I'm making an educated guess on how much I'm going to sell this year? So please, please, please take the time, write it all down so you know how things went. Sit down, do it with a glass of wine, do it with a coffee, whatever, but please write it down, because it's how you're going to build on it for your next peak period. So that were all my notes. I think I've covered everything. I'm sure you'll let me know if I forget something. I hope it helps. I do plan on having this one out in about a month or so before Mother's Day to give you a little bit of time. If it has helped, I would love to know. Please send me a DM at the Flowery Folk or at the Posy Crew. I'd just love to know how you went for Mother's Day. Also, if anyone else has found any other tips to get through Mother's Day or Valentine's Day or any peak period and what they've done, because let's share it with everyone else. That's how we all become much better at doing what we do. Share the information with everyone. Let them all succeed, and then we all succeed as well. So thank you very much for listening today. If you have suggestions for topics to run through, maybe people to chat to, please let me know. You reach out on the socials, or you can go to the website and fill out the contact form there. I really want to spend some more time interviewing people within the industry. Particularly, I'd love to talk to some growers. So if you know someone who you think would be great for the podcast, please let me know or let them know to reach out. I'm happy to contact them if you tell me who I should be talking to, because I just think the more people that get involved, the better it's going to be. We're all going to be sharing all our knowledge, all our fun tips and tricks, and yeah, I think it'll just help. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for listening, and until next time, see ya.